Also, when was like the first start of when we start to see actual like dog breeds?
Yeah, everything from 20,000 years on to like 10,000 years, so that time period we were hunter-gatherers, until we started farming, and like most of the world was still hunting and gathering for most of the time. But uh, the dog, according to researchers, would have looked mostly like a in between a wolf and a dingo, just like a standard yellow coat, standard like brown looking village dog, and just a wolf that got smaller and dog shaped. And then from then, like in the Neolithic, where you have now people that have time to breed dogs, and you need dogs for hunting, and people are farming all day, you need them to protect the fields. Like I'd imagine that's when people were like, especially with trade, being like these dogs are really good at detecting predators. These dogs are really good at herding the sheep. Like, and then like all that trade would have happened. And since dogs, in my opinion, are a technology, and also like another organism, it's just like it makes sense they would be traded and mass produced in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like the moment in time in the past when we started to kind of stay in one place, that was when it was more suited to try to start more specific breeds for different purposes, I guess, right?
Yeah, because with hunter gatherer societies, you see more art and more um, cultural material in places like caves, obviously because it preserves, but they would have been huddled in there when it was really cold, and you make art when you can't go outside. But the more
Right.
mobile you are, the less art you leave behind because you don't
Mhm.
have time for it. So in the Neolithic, and not just to say art, but other jobs and tasks and things like that would have been so diversifying it like rapidly. Yeah, including
Yeah,
dogs.
I love like your term that dogs are kind of like a biotechnology, especially when we get into certain dog breeds as well, like the Saluki and the Border Collie, and then going down further and further. Um,
Yeah, yeah, like the NYPD is now using those robot dogs
oh
for
yeah.
just specific things, and obviously the army uses it too. But it's funny to me that we look at that as like technology's getting crazy with like a robotic dog, but also if you think about just how you can whistle and a border collie can then herd 100 sheep into a pen is like better than any computer or AI robot there exists now, and that's been around for 10,000 years. Um,
Yeah.
so I find that so fascinating, but I am curious to see how you know like what are dogs going to look like in the future in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely going to be very interesting, and I feel like that's so cool too to think about, like dogs intuition and what they're built for and what they're made for too, and the different uses like to guard or to protect or to hunt. There's so many different dog breeds. When I grew up, I was definitely one of those nerds. I would carry around a huge dog breed book.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I think my
So
brother had that too.
yeah, it was like a big gray book, and I would just like take it everywhere with me. So, like, I'm
Cool.
very good with dog breeds, but I've clearly always found that very fascinating too.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also funny too. It's like I also wanted to ask you, like you said too, that wolves are not like, clearly there was a separation, and we're not 100% sure, or I guess there is still a debate about whether the gray wolf now is the direct descendant of the dog or whether it could have been another one. We're not sure about that.
That is, I keep saying that's debated. That's just how science goes. Uh,
Yeah.
but from my understanding, like, there's multiple studies that say it could be, you know, the descendant of modern gray wolves, and the gray wolves just kind of did their own thing still, and they're the same thing. It could be an extinct gray wolf species that dogs are, descended from, and those are gone, and the current gray wolves are different, you know, that aren't related. But then it could also be that they modern gray wolves and the wolves we have now, or the dogs we have now, share a common ancestor. Uh, but either way, when I explain evolution to people, and this works really well with understanding dogs too, it's like when America was colonized, You had British people, and they moved here, and then it became America. So there's like English speaking people here that became America in 2010, and then there's British people that became, what Britain is in 2000. Or sorry, it's 2024 now, not
Yeah.
2010. um, uh, we're still, related in that sense. We share a similar language, but we're very different cultures. Um, and I would say wolves and dogs is kind of like that. Like you can still, obviously, you can interbreed with British people, but you can still mutually understand your language. It's a very similar culture, and you're still related in that sense culturally. But in terms of dogs and wolves, they can still interbreed. They can communicate and they can interbreed in the same sense, and that's like kind of how speciation works.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because
yeah,
I remember you talking about, like, it's not the same thing to go out and get a wolf. Like, you have to keep training them. Dogs have been domesticated over hundreds of thousands of years to be by our sides, right? Or, like, to be technology to us. And wolves kind of have stayed in their own path. It's not like you could go out today and just, like, domesticate a wolf, right? So,
to my understanding, yeah, I've
yeah.
would love to interact with one, but it seems to be the case from what
Yeah.
I've been told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you heard also, or about, like, I guess, I don't know, I heard something on the internet about how, I mean, I don't know how they would know that a woman specifically did, but they said that women had a huge part in domesticating dogs, or did dogs at least like stay at the house, or like, or the cave, I guess.
Yeah, this is one of the more fascinating things about anthropology to me, especially with like modern politics. It's like when the French, the Spanish, and the English got, especially here to the Americas, and documented, how the indigenous communities existed. You can look at it with the critique of, they had their European Christian lens and probably just didn't care to write about the women maybe and just wrote about the men.
Right.
Or they wrote about all of it, and that is accurate that, the women do all this work and things like that. But something um, that I've always noticed that like seems to be pretty unanimous and like it aligns with indigenous oral histories and things is that women do, at least in Native American societies, like it's like a sacred thing that they do raise the dogs and take care of them. Um, so I find that cool, and in a lot of like their creation stories and like mythologies and like gods and deities and things like that, they have like the gods have pet dogs a lot of the times, or it's just like there.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
that is very
So
cool.
yeah. I hope I stated that correctly, but yeah, it's just like it's hard to understand if like everything they wrote down was like actually correct in a lot of their ways, but yeah, it's that one. That one seems to be like factual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, because you can like look over a bunch of different sources to kind of verify, or at least like put them together to see what I guess that's the hard part too about, history, right? And looking back at history is having unreliable sources to base things off of as well.
Yeah. Especially back then. And something I learned about too is like since the English, the Spanish, and the French were all, and I guess the Portuguese and Dutch too, were all competing, you know, capitalistically in terms of business for, colonizing. Like they would make propaganda against the Spanish and make them seem terrible or like, yada. So even reading those sources, you're like, well, of biased sources, this one's even more biased. So which one do I read? Yeah.
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 And you have to like go and pick through and like try to go past people's opinions in order to get to the fact within the writing, which you're sometimes there's not any physical evidence, so you only have oral evidence or written evidence of what you have in front of you. So I can imagine how hard that could be too.
Yeah, very much so. And a colleague of mine is Pawnee, and he does like radiocarbon dating statistics to kind of understand and correlate that with oral traditions of the Pawnee Nation and things like that. And it seems to correlate for the most part with what was written down by explorers and things. So
Oh, that's
uh,
very cool.
it's cool. Archaeology can figure out a lot.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I think that's so cool. And I guess also I remember you talking about was that there's a specific law when you're doing archaeology in the United States to protect like indigenous sites, but you can learn a lot through the dogs, right?
Yes. So, I guess to put this into perspective, since like you have the old world, Europe, Africa, Asia, and then like the land bridge from Alaska to Russia.
Hmm.
Um, like the bottleneck of Native American population, there's debates as to how they got here. People think, the usual one was the land bridge. Other people think it could be, boats and things like that. But genetically, it seems to be Northeast Asia. Everyone filed into the Americas, and then it got cut off. So indigenous Americans can then pretty much trace their genetics all the way back to that initial, you can say colonizing or peopling migration of North America and South America. And because of that, any remains found in the United States, there might be other laws in other countries, but the U.S. is, where I work. It's called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And any grave found or any human remains or even like what's called objects of cultural patrimony, so just like a pipe or like a carved bone or something like that that was with the burial, um, belongs to the tribes. And what we have to do is then, if you find any remains alive or dead, or recently dead or very old, you call the coroner, and then the coroner will come, and then the tribes come and basically can decide amongst themselves who gets to claim ownership, but they all still share kinship with the remains. Um, and in that sense, we can't really study the human remains or test the bones and see what they, have to say. But you can get a glimpse of human diet through the dogs that you can find of what they were eating and consuming, because that still, remains in their bones too. And a lot of dogs around the world today, but also for all of history, just eat human feces.
Fun.
And really fun. Yeah. So even if they weren't directly eating like food off of our plates, they're eating what humans were excreting. That
Right.
sounds it's gross, but it's all just the same chemicals that we're looking for. Yeah.
Right.
That was a
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, that's good. Yeah. Gross but knowledgeable at the same time. And I guess kind of good because it makes sense to at least like respect the like indigenous like part of the burials as well, and then at least I feel like we could still learn from the past and not disturb that other portion of the site as well.
Right. And it's debated. There was a big court case in the 90s about like called the Kennewick Man. There's a very old remains. He had like a spearhead in his hip, and just like as a very old intact one that could tell us so much about the history of Native Americans here. Um, and it went to trial, and the tribes ended up winning, and it was like a landmark case of like uh, you know even if it's that old, they still have the ownership. But another thing that I often ask my students too is like, even though we can get this information from dogs too, if dogs, I keep preaching like how close they are to people and we're burying them and things like that. If the dogs are buried carefully in a neat grave by Native Americans, should they be classified under that law as well?
Mm.
And some tribes will argue, no, it's not too often that you find a like perfectly made intentional burial of dogs. So luckily that argument doesn't come up too much, but it is something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good thing to think about because we are so connected to dogs, and we have such a close connection that we're even I think I heard something that we could like read each other's facial expressions too. Like we've grown to read each other as well, which is pretty fascinating and cool.
Yeah.
So,
And that's another thing that comes from like wolf social behavior is just eye contact and your dog. I think it's called whale eyes when they look to the side and like it means they're uncomfortable with you and stuff like that. Like dogs even have eye movement things that we can pick up on and things like that. And
yeah, I feel
yeah,
like I watched a video and there was like a very interesting study about how I guess like people like they ask them to, oh, what does this dog mean right now? Like they're barking. Oh, that bark means that it's angry. Like we can just pick up their emotions like that, you know?
yeah. Like I know my dog barks to an extent. Like I know that says happy, I want attention bark, and then he has his like there is a coyote in the backyard bark, and like it's
Yeah.
very distinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I have two dogs. I have a 100-pound Newfoundland named Claire.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and I have a mini Australian Shepherd. He's sleeping right here. I call him my shadow because he's always following me everywhere. But
Good.
I always say that he specifically has like a sixth sense for reading my emotions, like if I'm like sad or something, like even and then dogs in turn also read our emotions and like he knows exactly what I'm feeling or like he'll come up to me and comfort me. Um I mean, it's just so cool that dogs kind of really were made to kind of be our best friends, you know?
Yeah, like biologically and chemically, and just how they're, I mean, essentially programmed. Like DNA is just programming, so it's
Yeah.
kind of it's cool. My
Yeah.
dog's not so much of a when he wants to be, he's like kind of my shadow, but he's a German Shepherd and Elkhound mix.
Oh,
So he's
cool.
like a hunting dog, but I don't hunt with him. So he's just
Yeah.
like constantly like, well, I need something to do. And he, how would I phrase it? He's just very like he won't let me pet him if he doesn't want to be pet. But when he wants to be pet, it's like the only thing that matters in that moment, and I can't do anything else. And he just has such a distinct personality and like intelligence that I've never experienced in like my previous dogs, which were labs and beagles and things. So, and I've heard people with German shepherds say it, and I always thought it was kind of an elitist thing to be like, well, shepherds are different, but they very much are. It is like my dog is a domestic wolf more so than my lab was, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much more intelligent I feel like my mini Australian Shepherd is than my
Aussies are
Newfoundland.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like incredible. I like kind of joke all the time that he can like think like know what I'm thinking, like or read what I'm saying or like, understand exactly what I'm saying. And I love my dog Claire. She's very sweet. She I just kind of I like, she's kind of a doofus
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But in the best way possible. Like she's so mushy. Like she'll literally come into bed and like my husband and I are on either side and she'll just fit herself
Yeah.
right in between us.
I miss that. Yeah.
Yeah.
My dog won't, he like refuses to sleep on the bed with me. He'll do it if I'm not there. But
Oh,
dogs sleeping in bed with you is like one of the like more interesting things about, dog domestication. Like they
yeah.
literally sleep in bed with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny and like I think there was also a study that people like sleep better when you're sleeping with a dog, and I feel like that just makes sense with talking about the domestication of dogs and them being used as like a tool and like protection and stuff, that we would just be able to sleep better. I know I do, at least.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot recently on the internet. I've not read the study, but I wouldn't doubt that at all. And I know sleeping with like fire is like a lot better for you, or comfortable, or some kind of small light like that. And yeah, I think it's the dog's breathing is what it is, and just knowing that that's in the room with you is like it calms your heart rate and stuff, and you sleep better.
Yeah, I
From
feel
what I
like there's
heard.
some instinctual part inside of you that's like, oh, God forbid anything happens in the middle of the night. Like they have better hearing than us, they have better senses than us. They'll be able to pick it up before, before I would. So even though I'm a
Yeah,
light sleeper.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if my dog is like, he's at my parents' house for like the week or something when I'm on vacation or something, and or sometimes like there's a you're still at home for a few days before you can go get your dog from somewhere. Those few days where I don't have my dog in my house, it's very weird because like you're not scared of sleeping, but you're like, oh, there is nothing to bark or warn if something comes in the house or something. Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely feel like uneasy. Like I remember when I first moved into my house and I was just like organizing, but my dog was still at my other place. And I just remember being in the house. I'm like, this feels very weird. I've always grown up with a dog in the house or a dog nearby. So when you're
yeah,
so used to that, it is definitely weird, you know?
yeah. And I remember when we lost our dog when I was in high school. It was like a
Oh,
weird thing that she's an old beagle. Like all the times where you'd be at your desk like working, or like I guess I was playing video games in high school, and she comes up and like, dogs put their snout to like up your arm or your leg to stop what
Yeah.
you're doing. Like, it's like weird that I assume when you lose any like a human, it's the same thing, but like the phantom dog wasn't there like messing with my arm when I was playing, and I found that interesting as a kid. Um,
Yeah.
Not to get like bummered to talk
No,
about
that's
something fun.
okay. I know
Yeah,
it's always so hard to lose our animals too. And I feel like for the longest time, um I couldn't talk about like my childhood dog without coming to tears, which I think is
yeah.
just such a part of like how like they're our best friends. I had a black lab growing up named Kelly, and she actually taught me how to walk, and I'd hold on to her fur and she just walk really really slowly. So
That's
I've
cool.
always had that connection. And then we always had English Mastiffs after that growing up, so I've always had
Wow,
huge dogs. Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, we had one dog named Elsa who we kind of rescued from a pet store, Shake a Paw. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but
Mm-mm.
yeah, unfortunately they didn't take very good care of their dogs, but we kind of had her, and she was like the runt, so she was kind of smaller. And then we went to a breeder who was trying to bring back the English Mastiff to what they were, I guess, in the medieval period, so
Mm-hmm.
like huge. And she was so tall. I'm like 5'4", and she was past my hip, like just on her fours. So
Yeah,
she was really really tall, almost
like a
like Great
big
Dane
dog.
tall, which is
Huh.
crazy. Yeah.
It's crazy how like the variations in sizes of dogs is truly wild. And
Yeah.
like technically a Great Dane could impregnate a Chihuahua, but obviously that poor Chihuahua would probably implode. But like the fact that that's like can happen is just bizarre to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's crazy that right, it's not, and it's cool cuz like it's not like they're all still connected, like they're all still able to do that. It's not like when a horse and a donkey get together and they make a mule and that becomes like not fertile anymore. It's like
Yeah.
there's still that connection there. Yeah.
And it's the same with wolves, coyotes, and dogs, like because they're all the same genus, and
Yeah.
like I would kind of argue the same species at the same time, because species is just such a it's a spectrum really. But yeah, they can all interbreed without making mules and things like that, and just interesting. Yeah,
Yeah. That's very cool. I guess to just kind of change like a little bit of topics, but
yeah,
is there like a particular like site or anything that like I guess you would dream of going to be able to like study more, or if you had one?
yeah. So the site that we've worked on for a few years here in Wyoming is the Laprelle Mammoth site, and that's the one with the mammoth that was hunted. And well, I'm not sure if it was hunted or they just like it was stuck in the river and they kind of dispatched it or something, because that also seems to be the case that they do. Either way, a large complex of what we'd call houses or like huts built around the mammoth, where they were, making stone scrapers to tan the hides and peel the hides. And there's a lot of it's called red ochre, which is like what they make the
Mhm.
handprints out of and stuff, all over the site, which they mined from a site that's a 2 hour drive away. So that would have been like a
Wow.
2 week walk away. And they got that from this. So obviously, this thing meant a lot to them for some either medicinal or maybe it has a functional purpose. We don't know yet. But at a site like that, uh, to step back, there's no evidence of dogs in the Americas earlier than 10,000 years. And there's a dog burial in Illinois that's 10,000 years old. But with the initial Ice Age hunters that came to the Americas, there's no evidence of dogs yet. So at a site like that, I would like to see those initial mammoth hunters that came here, or like large bison hunters that are now extinct, evidence of dogs. And in a lot of what's called ethnoarchaeology, it's like I had a professor that went and lived in Mongolia with reindeer herders to kind of understand how people in cold climates that live in tents migrate and how they occupy space. They have dogs, and what he noticed was the dogs when they come into camp, they're always screamed at or kicked or like get out, and like they eat people's poop in the woods and stuff, and they chew bones way off of site. So it is interesting that when we dig a site like that in Wyoming, where all the human activity and the stone tool, it's so cool because you can see the fire pits and then where they're making the stone tools around the fire. Uh, there's no dog bones there or dog burials, either that they just didn't exist or they were because there's a big rotting mammoth carcass right there. They're screaming at him to go away or they tie him up or something. Um,
Mhm.
so you'd have to dig just random shovel tests half a mile away from site to find any evidence of dogs. But to answer your question, my dream site would be like a mammoth and a human like just gored on the tusk would be kind of cool. But
That
um,
would be really cool.
really cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, any evidence of early mammoth hunters in the Americas with dogs to confirm that they were doing that because that happened in Europe and Asia. So
Okay, cool. So,
um,
yeah, so we haven't really seen that as much it like ancient wise past just 10,000 you're saying. Um
in the Americas,
in
yeah,
the Americas, right? Yeah. No, that would be very cool. I that sounds so cool, that site too. Like just
yeah,
I can't imagine what it's like to be able to actually like dig it up and be there and kind of get the first piece of like, oh wow, this is what ancient life was like. That's so cool.
yeah. And it, I've been sitting on the footage for 2 years because I'm just not sure how I want to make it good, and like I'm trying to figure out the difference with like prehistoric archaeology is you're just looking at dirt and like tiny pieces of stone and like stains in the ground. But to me, that's like a fire. That's people making tools. I can tell what time of year it was. Um, but when you have like Rome or like ancient China, there's you can clearly get a picture of what this looked like. But I'm hoping with like VR or AR or whatever we have in the future, like whatever Pokemon Go is, I think that's AR. Um, you can put like your phone up to the site and see all those like tents and the dead mammoth and things like that to understand it better because that's really the only way to show it. Um, because basically all my footage is just like people picking little rocks out of the ground, which to Nat
Right.
Geo doesn't make a great, story.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
That would be really cool though, like you said, to be able to like have your phone and then like see how it was. That would visually be kind of I could see how that would visually be like the best way to be able to recognize like that's how they did
yeah,
that and everything like that. I feel like ancient history too for me is so fascinating because like my podcast is called Find Your Wild, and
hmm
I think that ancient connection to the wild and like our connection to dogs is so ancient, and I love that connection, and I think like finding that today is kind of how we can like find our own wild, if you so well,
yeah.
um I really love that.
I agree. And I often say, like, people ask me, I don't know what the question is that they ask me, but this is the answer I give. I'm trying to think of how to get to it. Um, like, if you grew up in Hong Kong and you live in like a high rise and have a tiny little Shih Tzu or something, or Pomeranian, or if you're like me on Long Island, I had a beagle and a lab, or if you're me out here in Wyoming, you have a big hunting dog and I can go hiking with him in the wilderness and stuff like that. I Me and that person in Hong Kong and me out here in the woods still have that like connection to the Ice Age past that we had in the form of like a domestic wolf. So something that used to be dangerous, that used to be like, on our level in terms of like survival, and in terms of respect is now like still there. So we don't have to live in huts, we don't have to live in caves anymore. We have all this like amenities of modern life, but everyone still gets to interact with like if you live in an inorganic environment like a high rise in Hong Kong, you still have that organic thing that's connects us to the past, like that finds your
Right.
wild. I guess
Yeah.
if you want the clip.
The phrase, right? Thanks
Yeah,
for that. Yeah, no, it is. It's so true. And I think like that's kind of why I started this too, is like that there's so many different ways that we can do that like, and I also think of finding your wild as finding like your true inner self as well. And I think that I personally think connecting to nature is kind of a part of how we find our own wild, because we're still animals. We're still connected to
right.
animals. Like even as modern as we are, I feel like studies show like being in nature is really good for our mental health, and I think that
Absolutely.
just is a really telltale sign of like bringing our pasts, kind of like connecting it to our modern selves, and how we can have better mental health and better connections and uh being more of ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well put.